Welcome, Bryan, to the Losses Become Gains podcast. I really appreciate your time today, and I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks for having me, and finally great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to just start this off with you telling us about just who you are. So just outside of your loss, any fun facts you want to share, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Seattle, but these days I've been living in Denver, Colorado. I've been here for about a year and a half and been loving the extra sunshine out here, but still get the outdoor activities. So it's been great. Um, Sports are a big part of my life. Still try to play some recreational things. Golf is, one of the top things for me. So, it's always something to kind of kill some time and spend some time with friends on the weekends and also just music, just not only listening but also just performing and that sort of thing. My mother is a piano teacher, so got the genes from her for sure. And got that love for music right away. So yeah, things have been great and just enjoying my time.
That's awesome. What instruments do you play? Do you play piano or do you play anything else outside of that?
Yeah, so I got into piano, as I should, right from the get go. But funny enough, I didn't actually take lessons from my own mom because she thought we would bicker too much, and I wouldn't be as receptive to her teaching. So, she sent me to one of her good friends who's also a piano teacher, but obviously helped me with practice and all of that. But got into piano, thought it was a little too slow for me, so moved into drums around middle school. Learned guitar in high school and just love to kind of play piano just off to the side. It's so soothing and cathartic for me just to kind of mess around. So yeah, just try to keep those in my arsenal as best I can.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to ask about that was because I just think, especially with grief, like music and just like music therapy and stuff is so just comforting. Really can just help ground you and sort of bring you down. And it's just fun. But my husband plays guitar too, and my hands just don't work that way. But with the piano, like there might be some hope. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, speaking of grief and your journey of loss, definitely one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here because just from what I know of you so far, your story is, of course, it has our losses and everything which I want you to get to, but what you have created with it and the community that you want to build and are building is really beautiful. And I love the concept behind it. And it is very reminiscent of losses become gains to me. So I really resonated with that. So just tell us about your journey of loss and what your grief journey has been like for you. Because it's definitely one of the other reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because it's quite different than mine in terms of like when we've lost these prominent people in our lives. You were a bit younger. I don't want to steal your thunder. But you were younger losing yours than I was with mine. So I love getting that kind of different perspective too. So really just what has this been like for you, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so my grief story essentially started when I was 9 years old back in November 2004. Just to provide a little bit of context, my father was a lawyer in the Korean American community around the Seattle area. And he was working just on a typical court case, nothing unique, nothing different. And was going against a lawyer kind of in the area as the opposing lawyer. So they were in that court case together. Based on some of the court proceedings that I found out a little later on, it sounded like the opposing lawyer thought my father was a little bit ahead in the case. And whatever this meant, he wanted to put my father in the hospital for a time being, just to be able to catch up on time. And whatever that meant, whatever that took, who knows? Um, and so November 3rd, 2004, a day I'll never ever forget and completely changed my life, my family's life. My father and the opposing lawyer were supposed to show up to court together that day. It was just one of their court proceedings on that specific day. The opposing lawyer actually came to my father's law office, and as my father was walking out to his car, fired off a silenced pistol 3 times and struck my father in the head once. And that left him in a coma instantly, and was in a bedridden coma for a little over a year. And so my father passed away on February 11th, 2006. So, definitely a chaotic, just crazy situation, how things can turn so quickly. I just remember November 2nd, just watching some of the election news and with my dad, and he was teaching me all these things about, what's going on with elections in 2024, or sorry, 2004. And he drove me to school the next morning, and then throughout that day, I was just hearing more of the news, getting the updates from mom, and just a unreal situation. Just something I'll never ever forget, no matter how distant I get from that specific day. But just for my dad to battle for a year and a half, it was just so hard to see him in that state. He wasn't able to communicate, wasn't able to move, talk, any of that. And so just the repeated, ICU visits, rehab visits with my mom and my one older brother who's 3 years older, it just took such a heavy toll on our family. But I always say that my mom was the rock, and she is the reason why my brother and I are where we're at today. As I get older, I start to realize how much she really did. And she kept a strong face, because she not only had to be strong for us, but we knew that she was going through her own process with her husband. Um, and so I honestly, it's so remarkable kind of what she did, raising two young boys, and that sort of thing. So I'm always just so grateful for her, getting us through that dark period. But over, because I was 9 years old and my father passed away, a couple days before I turned 11. That was just those early years of navigating childhood loss at that age. And I think just being a kid, I was trying to process just getting through school and going through elementary and middle school, high school onwards, but really just how to process everything, was pretty difficult. Ended up developing a pretty significant anxiety disorder. It would be kind of mini panic attacks if I was in a new situation. So if there was somewhere I've never been before, or just going to a new sports tryout or something, I would just get extremely nervous. And that took a lot, a lot of years, a lot of just kind of growing, speaking with different grief counselors, professionals, just to kind of get some help there. And so that was definitely one of the darker periods, but it really kind of made me appreciate just family in general, what our love and our bond can do. And that, each one of us, myself, my brother, my mother, we're all going to have this different process of navigating and processing this. But we're going to do it together. And ultimately that's what happened. And that's how we got out of there, over that, that period where things started to kind of normalize. And, we just started to kind of get back to our normal routine, which is very important to me. So, as I got older, I started reflecting more and more about that time. And I really, from day one, just really wanted to use my experience to help anyone else out who's had something similar. And that's what really kind of got me into how can I get more involved, especially with kind of grief support and, child and teen loss. So I came across a organization called Aluna, that is based here in the United States. And they host something called Camp Aaron, which is kind of a nationwide, regional. Every state has some sort of Camp Aaron, but it's really a camp for young children and teenagers who have experienced a significant loss. And it was a blessing to find that, come across that, and see that there were volunteer opportunities. So 2019, I got involved, and really wanted to tangibly make a difference, instead of just kind of envisioning in my head and just having the hope to do that. So it was just so special to be a part of that volunteer experience, to see these young kids go through the exact same thing, if not the exact same thing, something similar, and just really kind of share that bond with other campers, but also just really kind of find some joy, even if it's for a weekend.
Yeah.
Which I think was so important, because I knew how much they were holding in within themselves. And once we had these different games, these crafts, these activities, but also some of these more internal special ritual events where they're kind of remembering their lost loved one, just kind of the mixture of the agenda was perfect for these kids and teens, I think. So that was very special, and that ultimately got into how can I help even more? I got bit with the bug of, this is incredible, and I just want to do as much as I can. And so that kind of led into This Is Why, which is a grief support platform and community that I founded on Father's Day 2021, fittingly. And it's really just a platform for anyone who has lost a parent as a child or teen, essentially in a written format. And I just want to be able to provide that safe space, for anyone, even with the option of anonymity, just to kind of share and release any emotions, thoughts that they have that have kind of been internalized and built in, and just kind of have that cathartic release and be able to provide that opportunity. That was something I really wanted to do. And, everyone has a different level of comfort, different level of vulnerability. And so I never force or, pressure anyone into it. I just want to provide, that option to write a letter to your younger self, or write a letter to your lost loved one, or however you want to do it. There's really no prompt, but it's really just kind of that expressive opportunity that I wanted to provide. So it's been a little bit over 2 years of continuing to build that platform and community, and it's just been so special to not only just hear different stories and everyone's unique experiences, but also hear how they've learned from it, and they grew from it, and they're just continuing to build on that from this day forward. So yeah, that's kind of a quick summary and and a wrap up of where we're at today.
Oh my God, where do I start with bombarding you with questions? No, I'm just kidding. Well, first of all, before we back up into just some of the grief that you went through, because I definitely want to talk a little bit about that. But if anybody does want to, submit something to you, just to like you kind of said, like have this release, like how can they do that, and how does that show up in your community? Is that something you post about? Just give some detail around that.
Yeah. So there is a story submission link, and I'm happy to provide all the links if you
Yeah,
did
this
want
will
to
all be
provide
in the
that
show
to your
notes.
community as
Awesome.
well.
Mhm.
And I also have a Linktree link, which essentially just has the links to all applicable, social media platforms, website, and everything. So, yeah, once a story is submitted, I definitely want to ask for any special, remembrance picture. But if there isn't one, that because those are very special and very, something treasured. So I also don't want to force that. So I can always just use a generic, photo that way. But it's really just kind of submitting a story, sharing it with the community, and also in that, other readers and contributors can kind of, gain some courage and hope from those. So it's just kind of building on these unique experiences and stories, and just kind of having a collection of all these, and really showing, how grief can it can be definitely a lifelong tough journey, but there is a lot of hope at the end of the tunnel, and we just need to build on each other together.
Yeah, there's so much uniting, I think, that can come from things like that. And I love that it's kind of nichey. I feel like we need some of these sometimes. So yours is focused on something kind of specific, and giving a voice to that. One I also came across was this woman based in Canada who it was more specifically around like girls or women who have lost their moms. And I just remember feeling it was so cathartic and such a beautiful way to honor my mom. But also just reading other stories from other people. I mean, these communities and what you're doing is so necessary, because grief is nothing if not a very lonely process. I say this all the time. You can have the quote right people around you, and you can have your loved ones or whatever, but if you are just in a dark place and really missing the person that you need, or it's just kind of not the right support, or you just don't feel seen and heard, it makes you feel that much more lonely. It's like it's a moot point. You're just like, I don't, it just makes the grieving journey that much more difficult. So I just think what you're building is so amazing and so needed, and really just giving, again, a voice to our grief, and giving people permission to talk about it and feel comfortable. And I love that you are doing this in a way where you're just like, hey, you could be totally anonymous. You don't have to let anyone know you're doing this or anything, or you can like shout it from the rooftops and you're just loud and proud. Like, here's the person or people that I've lost, and here's what I miss about them. And you know, and each end of the spectrum is beautiful and okay, because it's our journey, right? And it's all unique to all of us. So I think it's just such a healthy outlet that is so needed. So that's amazing. what I also just want to quickly do, so just backing up to kind of the sort of the beginning of your story, because one of the reasons I really wanted to again also have you on, and I don't think I've really spoken to anybody in depth about this yet, is losing, especially a parent, as a child, like a very young child, and how that could affect you developmentally, or just, like a lot of people I know of, we've lost our parents like in our 20s maybe or something, which is, not to compare, but it's just very different. Um, but before I even get into that, I have to ask, because my dad was a lawyer as well. What kind of law did your dad practice? I'm curious.
He, to be honest, I don't know the specific type of law that he was working on, but I knew that a lot of it was local and dealing with kind of businesses. So maybe
Gotcha.
commercial law there. But yeah, what about your father?
He was a criminal defense attorney.
Wow.
But first of all, I just wanted, let's really back up and just say, first of all, how profoundly sorry I am for not only the loss of your dad, how it happened. I cannot, my go-to is always like, I can't imagine. I can't begin to imagine. And yes, some of us can, who have lost a parent, we can imagine. But again, our circumstances are all so different. Having lost my parents to cancer, very different than very traumatic way of losing your father as you did. And not only just the actions of that individual, but everything after that. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I bring up the lawyer part too, because there were a few times where, and my parents would always like tiptoe around this. So I don't know if they were like death threats that my dad got, but he definitely got some again, threats might be a strong word, but like in that, I'm going to say line of business, because I don't have a more eloquent way of saying that right now.
Sure.
It is not the safest environment. It's very scary. It always like bothered me so much, these people that he had to stand next to and defend that did horrific things. And he was a defense attorney, right? But there was like no getting these people off. And so that always just it's uneasy, So I just wanted to, I don't know, just acknowledge that, and just acknowledge that sort of, commonality that we had. But I certainly did not know the detail of your story, so that I just know I had chills like the entire time you were talking, and especially being the age that you were at. So just getting into that for a moment. I mean, I definitely remember, like, as a kid there might be certain moments or certain things that are like you can remember super vividly, or you're like, kind of that typical like I remember it like it was last week kind of a thing. Did you remember days around that? Like, how fuzzy is that now, kind of that whole year and a half that he was still alive? Like, do a lot of those days kind of, are they still very vivid for you, or how does that work? Because I'm also realizing, just in my journey of grief, like, there's certain moments or certain days, and again, I was like in my late 20s at this point, but then like so much of it, I'm kind of like, oh, some of it's like a little gray now, or it kind of fused together in a way, almost to the point where I like start second guessing, like, oh, is that my memory, or is that something I'm kind of like making up now? Like, grief is crazy. So just, I want to say too, if anybody listening here is like feeling like they're going through this, or like losing their minds a little bit over if they're remembering something correctly, that's very normal. And I think a lot of us go through that. But just with you being so young, I'm just curious, like, I don't know, you've touched on that a little bit, but anything else you want to touch on there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there is kind of that, regardless of how recent that event was or how far away it was, I think there's just something so unique happening in the brain where it's just kind
Mhm.
of, do you really remember it? Was that a reality? And in my mind, I'm pretty certain of all the specific events on November 3rd,
Yeah, of
2004, just because how unique of a day it was.
course.
And of course, remember a few of the hospital visits, the rehab clinic visits. But to be honest, a lot of it was just kind of a blur and getting through one day at a time.
Yeah.
And I think that was just kind of a multitude of different things happening at the same time. I think just myself being 9, 10 years old, and just having this kind of young brain trying to process all of this, losing someone in our immediate family, how does a kid do that?
Mm.
And also just all the different kind of outside noise coming into our family. my mom did such a great job just really trying to temper down any of the public kind of exposure.
Mm.
And she was always careful about kind of protecting our family because we did have some local reporters try to just stop by the house and ask questions. And so my mom did such a great job just to kind of let my brother and I know, just keep us updated with what's going on, just kept us in the loop as best she could, but also kind of kept out all of the the court details, everything there. So she, as I always say, she just did such an incredible job, just so many different
That's
things that she
amazing.
did. um but yeah, you're exactly right. It was just essentially a blur for quite a bit of time. Just because we had to now readjust as a family in terms of, okay, this is our life as a team of three instead of a team of four. How are we going to do this moving forward? And so, especially just kind of that anxiety disorder for myself, just starting to develop, trying to get help that way. And then going into the middle school years, which are, hard enough as it is. And so all that was really kind of a blur in between when everything happened, and then also some of the recent years after that. But as I reflect, I just try to remember, to be honest, more and more and as much as possible, because that is ingrained in my story in my life and how I got here, and I never want to lose that. And that's something that you've been so incredible in doing with your work in your space, is that really kind of learning from your losses and how you can essentially benefit from just such tragic crazy experiences. So
Yeah.
um yeah, definitely was difficult, whatever the specific reasoning, or if it was just a combination of different reasons. But we just got through it, and just it was something that I'm going to be forever grateful for, because we just stayed on the right path together as a family and just continue to be so close today. And it's something so special to me.
That's awesome. Oh my God. I feel like a loss like that can like kind of make or break you as a family unit, individually, and all of that. Um, your mom sounds unreal. I mean, I cannot begin to like comprehend what she must have been going through, not only just that day, all the year and a half after that, trying to balance two boys, husband in a hospital, like, and that's an extended period of time. I mean, I can, again, only a fraction of can like empathize with that, just seeing, what my parents went through, and just in and of itself how hard that was, just trying to like work and maintain a job and do a decent job as we're going through that. But then you on top of it, you're going through school. And then yeah, your mom, I mean, she just sounds like an absolute hero. I mean, like, have you talked to her now that you're like older? Have you talked to her about, I'm gonna say, how she kept it together? That's probably like a huge blanket statement because there's probably so much complexity to that. But like, did she ever kind of talk about that? Like it was just a day at a time kind of thing, or like how she kind of like kept her head above water?
Yeah, we haven't really gone too in depth yet, but it's something that is just kind of inherent with how, we move through those past years. But I think she just had such a strong support group around her, which I think is pivotal for anyone and everyone.
Mhm.
We had such great neighbors that were willing to help all the time. We had, family friends that were willing to help all the time. And she was, as you touched on, just dealing with so many different things. And so when we would have some of our friends come over and just kind of console her, and I remember that she would close some doors in the bedroom, and I could hear her crying, and it killed me. It really just hurt, knowing how much she was going through at that time. And was just such an intense kind of couple of years, really just trying to navigate, like I said before, how are we gonna push forward through this.
Yeah.
um, and she also had to deal with the court proceedings, because the opposing lawyer, forgot to mention, did get caught a few minutes after, because he tried to actually run
I
away.
want to ask about that. Okay, good.
Yes,
Okay.
did get caught. And yeah, so they were going through, so my mother and our family was now going through another court proceeding
Right.
with this opposing lawyer and trying to figure that whole deal out. So just her keeping that under wraps, not really giving my brother and I too much detail. It really helped our childhood growth, I would say, because I think something even more traumatic than what happened in terms of learning some of the details and all of that would have just been incredibly, difficult to come out of.
Right.
So I think her ultimate goal for us was really just to kind of have us have as normal of a childhood as possible. And
Yeah.
so she kept us in sports, kept us, in music if we wanted to do music, but just so grateful that she never really pushed us to do anything, but really just kind of um, almost nudged us to make sure that we're not just going to, veer off the wrong path or anything
Yeah.
like that, but just stay, just be a kid as best as we can, and we'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah, just like some sense of normalcy, whatever normalcy really even meant at that point.
Exactly.
There's kind of
Exactly.
never a normal again, but you do. I actually kind of hate this whole like new normal thing after COVID. I'm just like, it's just nails on a chalkboard now anytime I hear that. But I hate to say it, but like a new normal, that's pretty much what it is. It's not, there is no going back. There is no feeling the same as before. And I think a lot of people resist that, and understandably so. That is that, you just want things to go back to the way they were. And for such a senseless, I'm going to say crime, because that's really what it was. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, all three of you, I'm sure, were just had your own different ways of processing it and everything. But yeah, especially as the parent, as the partner, as she was. I mean, I know none of us are perfect, but I truly, just from what you're telling me, like it sounds like she handled it as gracefully and as perfectly as she could. And I think also, I'll just say, and then I'll go to the next question, is just like it sounds like she did a really amazing job of not keeping you guys in the dark, which I actually think is so important. And I would imagine that a lot of parents might want to do that because they're just so afraid of, of traumatizing their kids more, or, it's not appropriate or whatever. But there's a reason that like a lot of I'm just going to say, I'm not making this up, but I think it's like therapists and counselors or whatever, they encourage you to use the word "they died." They are dead. They didn't pass away. And I catch myself using that still, but just to be blunt about it in some ways, and to just not tiptoe around those things. But of course, understanding you're 9 at the time, and your brother, it sounds like, was not much older or younger, and still having to just filter in what you guys, hear and see, not to, and knowing that, okay, the details will come with age or when it's appropriate. So it just sounds like she did just a phenomenal job of a lot of things, but with kids, I'm sure that's just an added complexity to an already devastating situation. So lot to be learned from you, but a lot to be learned from your mom too. So just giving her some kudos in this episode, because it sounds like she deserves it.
He does.
Yes. So what is something, and you've kind of answered a little bit about this, but just to ask you more directly, what is something about your loss, or just in any, just specifically about your dad's death, or maybe the day that everything happened, or the year and a half after, what is something that you found to be the most difficult? Or I also like asking this question, is sort of like something you didn't feel warned enough about, in terms of like how hard it would be. And I know that's kind of maybe a tough question to answer in like your 9 or 10-year-old self. But if there was anything, again, back then, or that you've realized now, that you're just like, ooh, nobody told me how hard was going to be, is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, a couple things. I think one, just experiencing loss, just,
In and of
as
itself.
simple as that,
Yeah.
and my dad and I were so close. That's what made it especially tough. Um, but also kind of a second point related to that is, it's something that I think about more and more, is my dad's death wasn't immediate. It was kind of this prolonged year and a half. And so I kind of wonder, how obviously would hope dad was still here today, but if something happened within a day, how would my circumstances change? How would our family's, entire kind of ecosystem change together? And I think what was just so difficult was that it was kind of stretched out for so long, and just seeing my dad in that way, um, and just repeatedly going back to the hospital, the rehab center, just seeing him over and over again, and we loved that he was still with us, he was still fighting. We knew that, but just seeing him just struggle and was so incredibly tough just to just to see as a kid and just how close we were, like I mentioned. But yeah, those were just kind of some things that now looking back, it's not necessarily something you should be warned about, but it is something where we kind of see every day where it's like, we some bad things happen to some good and decent people, and it's incredibly unfortunate. But that's why I also think it's so important, the work that you're doing and just having this support community and just having those resources available to really just try to help out anyone who, has recently experienced something like that, experienced it long ago, or unfortunately might happen, at some point in the future. So it's all just kind of gearing up for whatever happens in this crazy life we all have, and just trying to see, how can we just push through and persevere regardless of what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something you just mentioned too, kind of alluded to, like, circumstances can change in a day, right? So like in my instance, both of my parents' diseases and cancers were more gradual. Like it wasn't like one major event and then they either died or, then had to continue through a very intense, rigorous rehab process, or essentially, just not being with us in the way that we're used to, right? And as if that is not shocking enough as an adult, as a child, I cannot begin to fathom what that was probably doing to your young mind. That it's just you're trying to make sense of life in general, but then you did go through this very traumatic event where he might not have died right on that day, but then from that moment on, like as you knew him, no longer existed anymore. And then to move into this new phase, which yes, I guess we kind of get used to, I'm gonna say, but then you don't. I mean, you never really. It's every single time you could see them still laying in the bed as they were when you saw them yesterday, but it doesn't. You're just like, oh my god, is this really my life? Like, how did this? Not to make it all about ourselves, but seriously, it's like, how did, how did we get here? And one thing I just wanted to also quickly ask you that came to mind was, I talk about anticipatory grief with some guests on this podcast. I've had an episode about it. Do you feel like you went through some of that? Like I know at a young age, maybe you were, but didn't obviously kind of maybe know what anticipatory grief was at the time. Do you feel like that was prevalent for you, or maybe your mom? I'm sure to an extent, and even not knowing, you know, what the fact that he would die eventually, but just the grieving of anticipatory grief of like he's not the same, he might never be the same, like that kind of a thing. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, my mom didn't necessarily share, any, percentage of, survival or anything like that. I think she just wanted my brother and I to spend as much time with him as we could. And so she may have known, early on in terms of, where we're kind of expecting he
Mhm.
might pass. But we just knew ultimately he was struggling and, and just suffering so much. It was almost kind of graceful, the day he passed, because obviously it was so saddening that specific February 11th day. But we knew he was free from pain. And that was just so reassuring for us because we saw him in the state for so long. And, we just knew he couldn't communicate how much he was hurting. And that's what really was so difficult. So it was really kind of a relief for us as a family, just to have him free of pain.
Yeah.
But in that, from that point forward, he was always going to be ingrained in our lives. And I'm so grateful for the 9 years that he had on my life and that impact. So it's something I'll never ever forget.
Yeah. I just want to mention too, I'm so glad you brought up relief, because that is not something I think is talked about enough or acknowledged, or it's very hard for people to say that out loud. Like, I feel relief that my loved one has died. That's a brutal thing to say out loud, because it sounds really icky, right? Like that doesn't sound good. But I feel like and I'm sure you would agree with me. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's not that we're happy they're dead. It's not like we're happy they're gone or anything, but it's like just as they would probably want for us, we don't want our loved ones to suffer. We don't want them. It's like in dogs too, and cats. And, I feel like it's like the same thing. It goes with like any living being. I think most of us, right, don't want to see or witness suffering, especially those that in those that we love. And unfortunately, it takes dying sometimes to free them, or to free us from that. And I can't, again, I keep saying I can't imagine, but I cannot imagine being in your dad's position and being in that state of suffering and not being able to then communicate it, but then you as his family kind of know. I mean, I you can't think of anything much worse, truly. So, but anyway, I just want to thank you though for bringing that up, because that is, like I said, a tough thing to verbalize. It's a tough thing to even admit to ourselves, like in our own brain. But it is something that I think a lot of us feel, a lot of us are right in feeling, and I know it feels slimy, but it is a reality of loss, and it does, and again, I like to say, like, I don't think our loved ones would want us, you know like, seeing them in that state, of course, but then also kind of suffering along with them in a very different way. um but especially with something prolonged like that, it's, yeah, there is a sense of relief that comes with. I would all just say here too, in case I haven't said this yet on this podcast, like I felt the same way with
Yeah.
both of my parents, because they were, and it was also just painful not seeing them in their normal state, suffering or not. It's just, and it's there's kind of this sense of like, how long can this go on for? This cannot go on forever. Like, this is, it's just too painful. So anyway, long-winded way to say thank you for saying that, because I don't think that's been acknowledged enough here, certainly on this podcast. So I think that's a great point, and a very normal and very natural thing to feel as well. So would love to hear from you. And you've kind of talked a little bit about some of this, but what are maybe like 2 or 3 overall pieces of guidance or tips that you would give fellow grievers who are going through some sort of, maybe it's anticipatory grief, or are experiencing a recent loss, or even not recent, it could be years removed, right? But who are just struggling and really just need somewhere to start right now.
Yeah, I think two kind of biggest facets in my own life kind of come to mind, and I hope it helps, anyone listening here. The first one is really, really taking things slow as you need. It things can definitely feel rushed, especially with how overwhelming some of our, day-to-day lives can be. And I think it's so important just to literally take it one day at a time. It's really just trying to figure out how can I, conquer this day. Just being, grateful for being here each and every day, and just how can I really just handle everything I got going on right now. I think it's so important because, it really kind of clears our mind to just focus on this time we got now, versus just stressing, over what might be happening in the next couple of days, week, month, year, whatnot. So I think that's so important, just to kind of slow things down as you need. And if you feel like you're in a groove, keep it going, keep it rolling. But never being afraid to kind of just slow things down, take time for yourself, and really just kind of focus on self-care and what makes you happy, and gives you kind of that sense of relief and just relaxation and comfort, and just kind of balancing everything there. So that's one of the biggest, things that I think is super helpful. Another is, which can be tough due to, levels of comfort and vulnerability, but I think it is so important to find support around you. It doesn't necessarily have to be, family. It's maybe a really good friend. It's maybe even not, someone you don't know very well. It could be a counselor, a psychologist, or someone, but just someone you can really express, your feelings, your thoughts, and just kind of get it out. Because I feel if you internalize everything too much, it can be detrimental, because you just start kind of overthinking things, and it really kind of, can dictate your mood and really affect, what your thinking process is for all aspects of your life. So even if it's just one person, to really just kind of connect with, and bounce ideas and, emotions off of, I think it's so important. So, just having a support group, and hopefully, that becomes bigger and bigger. So you just have an army behind you, just getting through this life together. Um, but I think just starting with at least one person is extremely beneficial.
Yeah. Beautiful advice. Yes. And I also want to mention too, you just touched on this, but having of course your friends and family and things around you and people who maybe can get it because they are perhaps they're connected to the loss in some way or they're connected to the person if it's a death. Um they're connected in that some way that can be very helpful, but it is almost beneficial I think in some ways to talk to a third party, especially if you're feeling like, yeah, maybe people around you are experiencing the loss too. But again, because we know grief shows up in all kinds of different ways, or you might have your own thoughts and feelings or whatever about it. Or, you had your special connection, let's say with the loved one who died. It can be very helpful to get just like a third party who maybe doesn't have quite the emotional stake in it, I guess, that some people around you do. I definitely, I went to therapy a little bit after my dad died because I was then finally able to grieve my mom because my dad went kind of his health started declining pretty soon after my mom's did, so I didn't really feel like I could grieve her. And then I went through a breakup and so just all the things kind of coming down at once. And I had very supportive people around me, but I was alone a lot. A lot of them could not, a lot of people sometimes listeners here, there's maybe somebody that can't be there with you 24/7. I see this all the time on Instagram. I don't know if you do, but there's just a lot of people that are very alone out there. And that is one of the most detrimental things, I think, in some ways that can happen to a lot of us, or we actually push people away and we make ourselves more alone than we maybe should be. Hi, guilty of that. Than we should be as we're going through something like this. And loneliness can lead to depression. It can lead to a lot of things. So again, just cautionary tale for anybody listening. Just again, I know we're hammering home the support and the support groups and everything today, but there's a reason for that. So whether it's a community on Instagram or, whatever it is, just finding like-minded people who can speak grief in a similar way that you do. I think, and that's what's so beautiful, I think, about this grief community, especially on Instagram, but just in coaches and stuff in general. We all might be experiencing loss, like overarching umbrella, if you will, but each of us, approach it differently. Some of us might have a little more humor or like dark humor in it, which I kind of do sometimes. And some of us might be a little more serious about it or a little more, there's just maybe more depth there. I don't know how to describe it, but finding the person that you resonate with, I think is really important too. And through communities like yours, you can do that, and that enables people to kind of find your tribe, if you will. I know that saying is kind of used a lot in this space, but it really is so important. Again, especially if you can't have people around you 24/7, like you're so lucky in that you had your mom and your brother. And I know, but there are some people I know, and I was kind of one of them for a little bit, who was living alone, didn't have anybody. So just to acknowledge kind of everyone here today, again, whether you have people around you or not, it can still feel lonely, even in a room full of people. So it's one of the most difficult parts about grief for sure, I think. So that being said, just to wrap this up, I love to kind of end with this question. I feel like you've pretty much touched on this and you kind of answered this already, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What does finding gains from your losses mean to you?
Yeah, just to kind of summarize, our conversation over this short period of time, it's really just reflecting and figuring out how to persevere through, any adversity, how significant that adversity is. It's really just continuing to find courage, hope, and just making the best out of your life. I think it's just so special, what we all have today, regardless of what we're going through. It's just, it's so great, such a grateful kind of understanding, that we get to spend time with, other humans and kind of do things we love and kind of go through this life. And, if we're impacted by loss any which way, there are going to be those ebbs and flows from, just dealing with internal, thoughts, feelings, mood, things like that. But, there's also a lot of good that can come out of this life as well. So I think just really just using your experiences, your past experiences, ingraining that as it is a part of you and not forgetting about it, but using that to kind of continuing to add on your strength and what's going to push you forward. I think that's really the gains that, I look for in my loss. So
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, it's adding value to your life. And I know that sounds kind of strange. And if anybody here listening is like very early on in the loss right now, I always say we're just planting seeds here. So if anything we've talked about today feels a little far away or far-fetched, or you're like, these two don't know what they're talking about, they're far too happy for me. Fair. Right. But it's always, this is, the kind of the mindset shifts that we just want to embrace and just know that they're out there. And I never want to impose like, if we can do it, you can do it on people, because I kind of hate that, but there's some truth to it. And it, like you said, it does take courage. It does take hope. It takes a lot of things. But I love the advice of the day at a time that you mentioned. And I always say it's all about baby steps. It can feel impossible just to like want to take our dog out, for a walk on any given day, or go get the mail or feed ourselves or anything. And so I think just having expectations of what we can take on or what we can do. And I know how difficult this is for anybody who maybe has children, right? Like your mom did. You still have to work. You have a million different things going on, but coming back to the present, I think you've alluded to just like being kind of very present, not trying to worry too much about like the future or getting too caught up in the past. And that's tough for people, because I think we do tend to get sometimes caught up in the past, maybe because we want to remember our loved one. And so I think there's just a little of a distinction of like remembering our loved one fondly and reminiscing without getting stuck back there, and we all easily could, and it happens to all of us. And so, like you said, it ebbs and flows. So we might have not only just really good and bad days, but good and bad moments within one day. So it's, grief is a process for a reason. But I think the advice that you gave is perfect. It's just not putting pressure on ourselves, and just giving ourselves permission to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just believe that it's there. Just believe that the tunnel is there somewhere, even if you can't see the light quite yet. And just making our loved ones proud. And we have such a short time here. And I think if anybody has seen loss of any kind, we know that better than anybody. So we can sit there and kind of wallow and let it get the best of us, or we can create something beautiful with it, which you have certainly done. So I am just so grateful to have had this conversation today. So like we mentioned, all of your links will be in the show notes and everything, but I know we connected on Instagram. So just really quickly, if you want to just say like your Instagram handle or any place where people can get in touch with you today, if they wanted to, where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. The social media handle is This Is Why Life. The website is thisiswhy.life. So hopefully kind of keeps things simple there. But thank you for everything, Tara. This was such an incredible conversation. And thank you for truly all the work that you're doing in, this community, and providing the resources that you've been doing, especially through your, incredibly difficult losses too. There's no, really comparing in losses. It's really just, we all have our experiences, and what can we make from that? And you're doing such a unbelievable job with that so far. And I can't wait to, be an ally in the space with you for the foreseeable future.
Yes, I love it. Me too. I know. And that's, again, such a perfect way to end, and such a perfect point. You and I, we have very different losses, very different experiences in life, but look how we've kind of moved forward and have a very similar outlook on life and mindset from it. You know what I mean? It can happen. It's possible. So we'll end on that hopefully positive note for people. But thank you as well for just everything you're doing. The voice that you're allowing people and empowering people to have could not be more important. I love to see more of that in this community. So yeah, I love it. Feeling very, very uplifted and inspired right now. So hopefully everyone is too after this episode. And I just appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story too. So much thanks to you.
Of course. Thanks so much, Tara.
Thank you.